So if you haven't heard already, Variety reported that HBO has closed the deal on multiple spin-offs for Game of Thrones when the series ends next year after 8 seasons. HBO has been planning a spin-off for some time now, and it looks like they aren't letting one of their best shows off the hook just yet. This is something I find surprising because HBO has had some great shows over the past few years, and they've never tried giving any of those a spin-off. But then again, this is 2017, and we're getting spin-offs for almost every single show or movie that has potential to be in what I call the binge-watch zone. Shows like Breaking Bad and The Walking Dead have been doing good with their own spin-offs, so I understand why HBO is throwing their hat into this ring when they've never really done it before. It makes sense, and from a financial point of view, Game of Thrones makes good money, so there would be no point in stopping it now, right? Well, before we get into my opinion on this, which will be way different from what you've heard, let's explore some options first of where the spin-off could go. Now, depending on who you ask or what video you've seen, the logical spin-off conclusion here would be a prequel series, and that brings to mind one thing: Robert's Rebellion. Taking place almost 20 years before Season 1, it tells the story of how the last Targaryen king went insane, killed his own people, and they revolted, culminating in what we have in Season 1. Robert Baratheon is king, Dany and her brother flee to Essos, and Ned Stark lies to everyone that Jon Snow is his son. While I do believe Robert's Rebellion is very interesting and can definitely dish out some good Game of Thrones action and political drama, there is one issue with it that I don't like, but I'll get to that in a minute. The second possible spin-off they could do is Duncan Egg, which takes place almost 100 years before Season 1 of the show, and tells the tale of a young Targaryen boy who teams up with an incredibly tall guy that wants to be a knight. It's a neat little tale of a friendship and legacy that fits into the world of Ice and Fire perfectly. I don't want to go into too much detail in case you don't want to be spoiled, but Duncan Egg is also a good option, and the one I'd bet my money on. Now, the third option would likely be the Targaryen Civil War, the Dance of Dragons. It takes place over 200 years before Season 1, and it has to do with a lot of political drama and big climactic battles involving dragons and lots of characters. Think Game of Thrones times 5. This option is the least likely because it involves dragons, which means we'd need CGI, and that would require a larger budget. I feel like this one could be done as an animated title done by a Japanese animation company, in the style we normally see from critically acclaimed series like Howl's Moving Castle or Cowboy Bebop. The issue from doing this is that the audience would have to get to know brand new characters in the same world, and some might not like the idea of starting all over in the same world, or HBO might think it'll fail because it takes place too far in the past to be connected with characters we've gotten to know for over the past 7 years. Now, my opinion on this differs completely from many others. While I love House Baratheon and I'd love to see a prequel series where they're one of the main characters, I do think it would be very limited for a writer to go into this era and do the material correctly with any freedom. Because Robert's Rebellion would be a direct prequel to Game of Thrones, much like Star Wars 1, 2, and 3, this would mean that certain things would have to be done in order to match up in the correct way with how things are in Season 1, and that is not always easy. A writer would want complete freedom and autonomy in order to make the spin-off as best as it could be, and if the spin-off was Robert's Rebellion, then they'd be pretty limited with what characters can do and say, and where they end up. Not only that, but ask yourself, do you want a prequel that leads directly into Season 1, or do you want an original story set in the same world with new characters, new twists, and new locations? I can think of one example where the writers had freedom in terms of a prequel story in an established franchise. The video game Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. I absolutely loved that game and how amazing the story was, and how they even rivaled the ultimate Luke, I am your father twist with one of their own. The game takes place many years before the original trilogy, and George Lucas gave them the freedom to do whatever it is they wanted, so long as they didn't destroy planets that showed up in future films. The result was perfect, but in terms of Thrones, I feel like Duncan Egg will be more preferable because it takes place far enough from Season 1, but not too far. It's in the Goldilocks zone, and unlike Robert's Rebellion, which has been told through characters reminiscing about it, Duncan Egg is written solely by George R. R. Martin with enough material to warrant maybe 3 seasons so far. But the issue with Duncan Egg is that the lack of characters. One of the biggest complaints about Game of Thrones is that there's always so many characters, many fans of the show can't remember them all. But in Duncan Egg, you'd have no problem with that, and there lie the issue. In the show, we have many characters who travel to many locations, and that serves as an excuse to travel the world and form new and interesting storylines to be invested in. Don't like Bran's storyline? That's okay, because we have Dany, Tyrion, and Arya to invest in. With Duncan Egg, it can be a hit or miss for many people because it's the characters we follow that are limited. However, when it comes to Robert's Rebellion, this wouldn't be much of an issue because we're following multiple characters on the continent, such as Ned, Jaime, Cersei, Rhaegar, Lyanna, and Robert himself. The one thing I'm also curious about is how far Dave and Dan, the current showrunners, are involved in. Supposedly they're signed on to executive produce the show, but I think that's just lip service so we don't worry too much about the new project. It does make me feel better that some of the new writers are working with George R. R. Martin directly to decide how to proceed with the spin-off, but it's a mystery as to how far he and the veterans of the show are truly involved, and I do worry, especially since it's HBO in regards to switching showrunners. I'm reminded of True Blood, which used to be my favorite HBO show for a while, and midway through the series they switched showrunners and it went downhill quick. I don't want to say Dave and Dan are the best showrunners we can have, but it could be way worse. Now, I've seen some people say that a cool idea would be an anthology type of deal where we get new characters, new locations, and new storylines every season, and that doesn't seem like a bad idea. If you're familiar with American Horror Story on FX or Black Mirror on Netflix, then you'll know what to expect. Maybe each season can focus on several characters from House Greyjoy, to Tyrell, to Martell, within different eras in the series, and each can have its own self-contained story that can span multiple locations and connect them to the main series. Since reusing sets is a big thing in Hollywood, they can just keep the ones they've built for Winterfell, King's Landing, and everywhere else, and just populate it with different characters, but that's just my opinion. But overall, this is good news. I just hope in the spin-off we get to visit more places, follow more characters from houses we've never seen before, and maybe even go further in Essos. The spin-off could go anywhere, but as long as we're getting the same political backstabbing with dragons and naked people, I think we'll all be happy in the long run. But as always, let me know what you guys think and would want to see in a spin-off. And of course, leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you haven't, and consider supporting us on Patreon. For $1, all supporters receive exclusive content and early access to the Game of Thrones podcast before it's everywhere else. Preston and I even discussed the spin-offs today, and I just released it on Patreon, so consider supporting us for this and more exclusives in the future. Guys, thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time. Baba Booey.